40 crimson roses hit the white marble floor of the international terminal one by one, scattering like broken promises across the cold stone, and Gideon Vance, a man who had never once begged for anything in his 43 years of living, forgot how to breathe. The terminal roared around him. Luggage wheels rattled. Announcements barked overhead. 100 strangers moved in every direction. But none of it reached him. Not the woman on his arm. Not the sparkling ring box that had just slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. Not the curious stares of travelers who recognized the face of the most powerful man on the eastern seaboard standing perfectly still in the middle of the chaos, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on a single point 30 feet away. She was wearing an emerald trench coat. She didn't look back. She didn't search the crowd. She moved with quiet purpose, one hand pulling a silver suitcase, the other resting gently, protectively, against the unmistakable curve of a swollen, pregnant stomach. 7 months. Maybe 8. Gideon. The woman beside him tightened her fingers around his coat sleeve. Her name was Vivian, an elegant heiress. The woman his board had spent 2 years positioning at his side, the woman he had just flown 2,000 miles to propose to in a private airport ceremony. Her voice cracked like dry glass. "Who is that? Why are you looking at her like that?" Gideon didn't answer. His jaw tightened into stone. His voice dropped into a register so quiet and so cold that his 4-man security detail froze where they stood. "That child," Gideon Vance whispered, "is an absolute impossibility." Before we go any deeper into the dangerous truth that tore 2 worlds apart, take 5 seconds right now, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and turn on all notifications. You will not want to miss where this story goes. Drop in the comments right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. 8 months before those roses fell, Gideon and Elena lived inside something most billionaires never get to touch, a quiet, ordinary love. Elena Vasquez was not from his world. She was a maritime architect who had grown up drawing blueprints at a kitchen table while her mother worked double shifts at the fish market. She was brilliant, fiercely independent, and completely unimpressed by the Vance name, which was precisely why Gideon had fallen so hard he still hadn't recovered from the landing. They had a brownstone on the east side of the city, far away from the glass towers and the boardrooms. It was small by his standards, exposed brick walls, a kitchen that always smelled like cardamom tea, a bookshelf that stretched from floor to ceiling and carried the evidence of 1,000 conversations. Gideon had memorized exactly how she took her tea. He had spent 3 months secretly learning her favorite Chopin nocturne on the piano so he could play it for her after a hard day. He had never told a single person in his orbit about any of it because he understood, perhaps for the first time in his life, that some things are worth protecting from the world. Elena had been exactly 4 weeks pregnant on the Tuesday morning the walls came down. Gideon was miles away, locked inside an emergency maritime summit. The rain came down hard against the brownstone windows. Elena was at her drafting table, sketching the clean lines of a harbor expansion, when the courier knocked at the door. The envelope was sealed with the Vance syndicate's private wax emblem, deep burgundy, pressed with the old family crest. She turned it over in her hands, and her stomach tightened with a feeling she could not name. Inside was a single typed sheet of parchment. Elena Vasquez is to vacate Vance territory within 24 hours. All communication lines are permanently severed. This is an absolute, non-negotiable eviction. G. Vance. She read it 3 times. Then she set it flat on the drafting table and sat very, very still. Refusing to accept it without proof, she used her security clearance to log into their shared corporate network. She wasn't looking for confirmation. She was looking for the mistake. The glitch. The hack. Something that would explain why the man who had kissed her temple that morning before leaving for his summit had also somehow, simultaneously, signed an order to have her removed from his life. What she found instead destroyed her piece by piece. Verified bank logs. A corporate transfer of $2 million to an offshore relocation firm registered in her name. A one-way flight manifest authorized by Gideon's personal executive bypass code, the code he had once told her, while lying on the floor of the brownstone laughing at the ceiling, that he only used for decisions he made completely and entirely alone. She sat on the floor of the dark hallway for 6 hours. She built 100 explanations. She tore every single one of them down. By midnight, only one conclusion remained. Gideon had found out about the pregnancy. He had decided the child was a liability to his impending corporate ascension. And he had chosen to pay her off and erase her quietly, the way powerful men erased inconvenient truths since the beginning of time. Her pride, thick and unyielding and forged in years of fighting for a seat at tables that were not built for people like her, hardened into armor. She did not cry. She did not leave a voicemail. She packed one suitcase, left every cent of the corporate money untouched in the account, and caught a dawn flight to a remote, windswept town on the Scottish coast. She told herself that her child would grow up knowing dignity rather than representing a billionaire's hidden obligation. She told herself she was done with Gideon Vance forever. What Elena did not know was that at that exact moment, on the other side of the city, a different kind of storm was raging. Gideon returned to the brownstone early that afternoon to find the woman he loved completely gone. Her coat was still draped over the armchair. Her favorite book was open on the kitchen counter, spine cracked at a chapter she would never finish. Her cardamom tea mug was sitting in the sink cold. There was no note, no text, no trace, no explanation. Just the hollow, echoing silence of a life that had been in the room 5 hours ago. Gideon turned his entire global security apparatus upside down within 48 hours. He ordered satellite tracking. He pulled immigration logs personally. He threatened border officials. He called in favors from government contacts on 3 continents. He was not the kind of man who accepted the word missing without a fight. Working at his side, sleeping in shifts, was Marcus Vance, his head of security for 11 years, his father's most loyal soldier, the man who had once taken a knife to the chest to protect the Vance family name. Marcus ran parallel investigations around the clock, tracking leads, cross-referencing data, coming up completely empty week after week after week. Then, in the 3rd week, the evidence began to surface. Gently. Naturally. Almost too conveniently. Marcus brought in a financial forensic report showing a massive withdrawal from their joint account, routed to an untraceable overseas bank. Then a series of recovered text logs from a deleted messaging application on a tablet Elena had left behind, words between her and a mysterious foreign competitor, discussing a departure date, a permanent buyout, a guarantee of silence. And finally, Marcus placed a high-resolution surveillance photograph on Gideon's mahogany desk. Elena, at a private airfield, standing beside a wealthy foreign executive, luggage stacked at her feet, smiling warmly. Not a woman who had been forced to run. A woman who had chosen to leave. Gideon stared at that photograph until his vision blurred. The ruthless CEO inside him, the man trained since birth to cut losses and destroy adversaries, told him to file her under lessons learned and move forward. But the private man, the man who had memorized her tea order and learned Chopin in secret, slammed his fist through the solid oak wall of his office. He kept looking. Not because logic demanded it. Because something was wrong with the architecture of the betrayal. Real heartbreaks were messy. They left ragged edges, missed details, human errors. This one was too clean. Too perfectly engineered. It answered every question before he could ask it. And in 20 years of navigating the Vance syndicate's cutthroat internal politics, Gideon had learned one immutable truth: when something is perfect, someone built it that way. He just didn't know yet who the architect was. Now, in the roaring chaos of the international arrivals terminal, staring at Elena's retreating figure in the emerald coat, the 8-month-old illusion cracked down the center. Gideon moved. He didn't run. Men of his stature never ran through public spaces, but the sheer force of his stride made the crowded terminal part before him. He was closing the distance between them when he turned his head, just for a second, and looked back at Vivian. She was watching Elena's retreating back. It wasn't jealousy on her face. It wasn't heartbreak or confusion, or the wounded pride of a woman watching her fiancé chase another woman through an airport. It was something colder than all of those things. It was calculation. The flat, precise expression of a chess player who has just realized her opponent brought an extra piece to the board. Gideon stopped walking. "Vivian," he said. His voice was very quiet. "You know exactly who she is, don't you?" Vivian blinked. A flawless, practiced smile slid across her face, smooth as silk over steel. "Darling, she's nobody. Probably just some disgruntled former contractor from the docks trying to make a scene. Let the security team handle it. We have the Sterling family dinner in an hour." Gideon did not move. "I never told you she worked at the docks," he said. Vivian's smile completely disappeared. For one suspended second, the entire terminal seemed to go silent around them. Then Gideon turned and walked. He reached Elena just as she reached the glass automated exit doors at the far end of the terminal. She was one step from walking out of his life a second time. "Elena." She stopped dead. She didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still for 3 long seconds, as if she had spent 8 months on a cold Scottish coast preparing for this exact moment, deciding exactly how much of herself to bring to it. When she finally turned around, her amber eyes were vast and steady and gave absolutely nothing away. "You look well, Gideon," she said softly. 8 months. His voice shook. The raw emotion in it was something he had not permitted himself to feel in a lifetime. 8 months of silence, and that is what you give me? Where have you been? Away. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are permitted to have. Elena's eyes moved past his shoulder, scanning the terminal, landing on Vivian and the security detail standing in formation 30 feet behind him. Her hand tightened on the silver suitcase handle until her knuckles turned white. "You shouldn't have followed me, Gideon. I didn't come back to this city for you. Then why are you here?" He stepped closer, his eyes dropping to the unmistakable curve beneath her coat. "And whose child is that?" Elena laughed. It was a short, bitter sound that cut deeper than silence. "Don't play the blindsided father. It doesn't suit your reputation. You made your position clear when you sent the eviction papers and the buyout money. I kept my dignity. I'm raising my child alone." She lifted her chin. "I only came back to this city because the Central Medical Institute has the only neonatal specialist who can correct a minor cardiac irregularity before delivery. I came for her life, Gideon. Not for your empire." The word landed like a blade between his ribs. "Her? What eviction papers?" Gideon's voice dropped to almost nothing. "What buyout money?" "Elena, I spent every single day of the last 8 months trying to find you. I tore this city apart. I called in every favor I had on 3 continents. I never stopped looking." "Then your investigators are very poor at their jobs," Elena said flatly, "because the documentation had your personal encryption code, your digital signature, and your bypass authority stamped across every page. I saw the bank records. I saw the flight logs. I know what I saw. Someone forged them." "Of course you would say that now." "Elena." Before either of them could speak another word, her phone erupted in her coat pocket. She looked down at the screen and the color drained entirely from her face, not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had pulled a plug. At the exact same moment, Gideon's private encrypted line vibrated in his chest pocket. He pulled it out. An unlisted number. A single photograph. Elena, standing just outside the hospital gates. Taken less than an hour ago, from a distance, through a long lens. Below the photograph, 4 words. "She cannot leave alive." If your heart is pounding right now and you need justice to come, type "I'm still watching" in the comments right now. Your engagement helps this story reach thousands of others who love real human drama. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this story today. Gideon's head snapped up. His eyes swept the terminal with the cold, rapid precision of a man who had grown up learning that threats came dressed as ordinary things. Marcus was crossing the terminal floor toward them, moving fast, his face drained of color, a thick leather folder clutched against his chest. He didn't look at Elena. He looked directly into Gideon's eyes. "Sir." Marcus's voice was tight and low. "We have a tactical breach. The terminal is no longer secure. We need the private VIP lounge. Right now." Gideon looked at Elena. She was staring at the message on his phone, and the expression on her face was not the anger he had been looking at for the last 3 minutes. It was fear, the deep, bone-level fear of a woman who had already been running for 8 months and had just been reminded that she had not run far enough. He reached out and wrapped his hand around her wrist. Not hard. Not demanding. Just present. Certain. You are coming with me, he said. If you want your child to survive the night, you walk with me right now. Elena looked at the terror in Gideon's eyes, an expression she had never once seen on the face of this man in the 2 years she had known him, and felt the world she had constructed in Scotland shift violently beneath her feet. She walked. The security detail sealed the heavy oak doors of the private lounge behind them, shutting Vivian out on the terminal floor. Marcus dropped the leather folder onto the mahogany table with a sound like a judge's gavel. The Board of Trustees initiated an accelerated corporate succession review this morning, he said, his voice controlled but barely. Alistair Vance, your godfather, filed the paperwork 3 hours ago. If you sign the Sterling family merger next week, your absolute voting power over the global trade routes transfers permanently to the Collective Council. I know the charter, Marcus. Gideon's voice was granite. Why did Alistair move the timeline forward? Marcus opened the folder and turned it around on the table. Inside was a leather-bound corporate ledger, old and thick, the cover stamped with the Vance family crest in faded gold. He placed one finger on a single clause near the back. The bloodline provision, Marcus said. Under the original 1960 Vance Charter drafted by your grandfather, the firstborn blood heir of the primary line holds an absolute, unalterable veto over any corporate structure changes or transfers. If a verified blood heir exists before the merger signing, the entire transfer is legally frozen until that child reaches the age of majority. He paused. Your child is a living, breathing roadblock to a multi-billion-dollar corporate takeover that has been engineered across 2 decades. The moment Alistair's intelligence team confirmed the pregnancy 8 months ago, that child became the single most dangerous obstacle to everything he has been building. The silence that followed pressed against the walls of the room like a physical thing. Gideon turned slowly to look at Elena. She was standing very still, one hand resting against her stomach, her face white. The courier packet, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It had your personal encryption code, Gideon. It had your digital signature across every page. I checked. I triple-checked. I sat on that hallway floor for 6 hours before I accepted what I was reading. Gideon turned back to Marcus. The fury building inside him was the quiet, temperature-dropping kind, not hot, but absolute. The kind that preceded total destruction. Marcus, he said, you are the only person in the entire hemisphere with access to my private encryption key. You are the only one who can authorize a bypass on the flight manifest logs. He took one step forward. You built that evidence. Every piece of it. Marcus did not flinch. He did not run. He dropped his head slowly, like a soldier who had been carrying an impossible weight for a very long time, and had finally reached the place where he could set it down. Yes, Marcus said. I built all of it. The wire transfers. The text logs on her tablet. The photograph at the airfield. I fabricated every single piece. Gideon crossed the room in 2 steps and slammed Marcus against the wall, his forearm crushing the man's throat. Give me one reason, Gideon said, his voice cracking with the effort of staying controlled, why I shouldn't end you right here. Because I did it to keep her breathing. Marcus choked out, and something in his eyes, something raw and exhausted and sincere, made Gideon's grip loosen by a fraction. Alistair didn't just want her gone, Gideon. The moment his team confirmed the pregnancy, he ordered a permanent maritime liquidation. He wanted her at the bottom of the ocean. He wanted the child erased from existence before anyone outside this building ever knew it existed. Marcus's voice broke. I could not stop him directly. Starting that war before we had the legal documentation to expose him meant she died in the harbor, and you spent the rest of your life mourning a woman you thought had abandoned you. So I played both sides. I forged the eviction to make her run somewhere safe. I fabricated the betrayal evidence to make you pull your search teams back from the docks, where Alistair's men were already in position waiting for her. I fed Alistair a story about a compliant woman who took the money and disappeared. And I spent 8 months building the legal case to take him down before the merger signing. Gideon released him. He stepped back, his chest heaving, the weight of the last 8 months rearranging itself into a shape he had not been prepared for. Marcus reached into his inside jacket pocket and produced a small, military-grade digital recorder. He held it out. His hand was not entirely steady. "Everything I just told you," Marcus said, "is on here." In his own voice. Gideon took the recorder. Pressed play. The voice that filled the soundproofed lounge was one that Gideon had known since childhood, calm, patrician, utterly without warmth. The voice that had taught him chess at 9 years old. The voice that had eulogized his father at the graveside. The voice of Alistair Vance, his godfather, the man who had raised him after his parents died. "The woman is to be surgically removed before the quarter review. Use Gideon's digital seal. She must believe the order came from his desk. Her pride is as thick as my intelligence suggests. She will vanish into the dark and never bring the child back to face him. And she must never return. Under any circumstances. Ensure it is permanent." The recording ended. The silence that followed it was so complete that the hum of the terminal's air system seemed loud. Gideon stood without moving for a very long time. The memories of his entire childhood rearranged themselves inside him. The birthday dinners, the chess lessons, the eulogies, the years of carefully constructed fatherly pride, and revealed themselves for what they had always been, a performance. A long, patient, meticulously rehearsed performance delivered by a man who had been calculating the death of the Vance bloodline since before Gideon was old enough to understand what was at stake. "She rejected every piece of financial aid I tried to send her," Marcus said quietly, looking at Elena now. 3 months ago, I established a secure anonymous courier channel to Scotland and tried to get emergency funds through to her. She sent every envelope back unopened. She said protection from the Vance world was just a longer leash." He paused. "She came back on her own terms. Risking everything. Because the baby's cardiac condition worsened last month, and this was the only city with the specialist who could help. She didn't come back for your money. She came to save your daughter." Gideon turned to look at Elena. She was leaning against the edge of the mahogany table. The composure she had carried through the entire terminal confrontation, the armor she had spent 8 months forging on a cold Scottish coast, had finally broken. Tears were spilling silently over her lashes, and her hand was trembling against her coat. He crossed the distance between them. And then Gideon Vance, the man who ruled the eastern seaboard's maritime trade routes, the man whose name made boardrooms go quiet and competitors go pale, the man who had never once in his adult life allowed anyone to see him on his knees, lowered himself to the floor in front of her. He placed his palms gently on either side of her stomach. He felt the faint, rhythmic answer of a small life pushing back. 8 months, he whispered, his forehead resting against her knees, his voice cracking open in a way that no amount of control could have prevented. "I let them make me believe you walked away from me. I should have known. I should have burned the whole thing down until I found you." Elena's fingers found the top of his head. She traced the fabric of his hair slowly, tentatively, the way you touch something you had decided you would never touch again. "We were both reading the architecture they built for us," she said, her voice steadying itself one syllable at a time. "We were both prisoners of their blueprint." Then the security monitors mounted on the lounge wall flickered to life. 2 heavy black luxury sedans had pulled silently onto the private tarmac just outside the lounge windows. The doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out and fanned across the concrete in a formation that was not casual. And at the center of it, silver cane catching the bright airport lights, walked Alistair Vance. His face was composed, unhurried, certain, the face of a man who had never once in his long life been caught out in the open before he was ready. Vivian was standing at his right shoulder, pointing toward the lounge doors. Gideon stood up. Everything that had broken open in him, the grief, the loss, the 8 months of accumulated damage, compressed itself into something new. Something cold and immovable and absolute. The vulnerability left his body the way weather leaves a landscape after a storm, completely. He looked at Marcus. "How solid is the legal case?" Airtight, Marcus said. 18 months of documentation. The recording alone triggers 3 separate charter violations and 2 counts of conspiracy under maritime corporate law. The moment it hits the syndicate's legal office, the merger is dead and Alistair's board authority is dissolved. Gideon straightened his jacket. He looked at Elena one more time, at her steady amber eyes, at the unmistakable curve of a daughter who had spent 8 months being protected by a woman fierce enough to outrun an empire. "Stay in this room," he said. "Both of you. Don't open that door for anyone who isn't me." He walked to the lounge entrance. The men outside were moving toward the doors now, Alistair Vance at their center, unhurried and certain. The glass between them was the only thing separating 2 versions of the same story, the one Alistair had engineered and the one that was about to replace it. Gideon pressed his palm flat against the door. He had spent his entire life building an empire on the foundation his grandfather poured and his godfather maintained. He had believed, without examination, that the people who shaped him had done so out of love. He understood now, with the cold clarity of a man who had finally read the blueprints all the way to the end, that some foundations are built not to support you but to contain you. He pushed the door open and walked out to meet Alistair Vance. Not as a godson. Not as a successor. As the man who held the recording. "This is where you have to comment right now. Type, 'Justice is coming' if you believe Gideon has everything he needs to burn it all down. Subscribe if you are not already. These stories are built for people who never flinch from the truth. Like the video and share it with someone who would stay watching until the very last second. Because here is what no one in that terminal saw coming. What Alistair Vance did not know, what he could not have known, because Marcus had kept it buried inside a separate legal filing for 3 months, was that Elena, sitting alone on the Scottish coast, had not simply survived. She had documented every anonymous financial transfer Marcus had sent and she had returned. She had kept the tracking receipts. Every coded corporate communication that had leaked into the public business registry in the months after her departure, she had screenshotted, printed, and locked in a fireproof box beneath the floorboards of her rented cottage. Not because she planned to come back and fight. She was too proud and too exhausted for revenge. She had done it because she was an architect. And architects always know the only way to tear down a building safely is to document every structural load-bearing wall before the demolition begins. When Gideon stepped through that door, he was carrying Marcus's recording. Marcus was already transmitting the full legal package to the syndicate's independent ethics board from a secured line inside the lounge. And somewhere inside Elena's silver suitcase, wrapped in a soft cloth beside a letter she had written to her daughter and sealed but never sent, was a thumb drive containing 14 months of documentation that made the recording look like an opening paragraph. Alistair Vance had spent 20 years building a perfect machine. He had simply never accounted for the possibility that the woman he had tried to erase would spend 8 months on a cold Scottish coast building a better one. The empire did not fall all at once. Empires never do. It fell the way Elena's walls had fallen on that rain-soaked Tuesday morning in silence, piece by piece, under the weight of evidence so clean and so perfectly architected that not a single person in the room could find a gap in it. Alistair's board authority was suspended within 72 hours. The Sterling merger was legally frozen before the week was out. Vivian's role in the surveillance photograph, confirmed by terminal security timestamps that matched her Sterling family security access logs, was referred to the corporate ethics board the following Monday. Marcus gave his full recorded testimony voluntarily. He asked for nothing in return. He said only that he owed it to Gideon's father, who had been a man of actual honor, which was a different thing entirely from being a man of power. Gideon spent the first 3 days of that week sleeping in a chair beside Elena's hospital room, a cup of cold tea on the table beside him and his phone turned face down, while the greatest corporate unraveling in Vance syndicate history assembled itself steadily in the legal offices 17 floors below. On the 4th day, a daughter was born with a strong, corrected heartbeat and her mother's amber eyes. On the 6th day, Gideon walked into the hospital room carrying no roses. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the two of them for a long time without speaking. I'm not going to say I'm sorry, he said finally. Elena looked up from their daughter's face. Good, she said. I'm not interested in an apology. I'm going to say that I should have known the architecture was wrong from the first moment I saw it. He looked down at his hands. And that I am going to spend whatever time you will give me building something that is actually true. Elena was quiet for a moment. You still remember how I take my tea? She asked. Cardamom. No sugar. Exactly 2 minutes deep, not 3. She looked at him for a long time. Start there, she said. And outside the window of the hospital room, 16 floors above a city that was already beginning to rewrite itself around the absence of Alistair Vance's shadow, the morning came in clean and ordinary and entirely without ceremony, which is precisely how the best foundations are poured. Not with fanfare. With truth. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel right now and never miss another one. Leave a like, it takes 1 second and it means everything to this community. And tell us in the comments, did you see Marcus coming? Did you trust Vivian from the beginning? We read every single comment. Share this video with one person tonight who needs to hear a story about what survives when everything false has finally been cleared away. We will see you in the next one.